All right. Well, good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we are delighted to have our old friend with us, J.A. Jance. She's going to be talking about the brand new Brady novel that's just come out, which I'm told is number 21.
Can you shift that around a minute, Patrick, so people can see that sometimes the title is white and sometimes the title is silver?
That is pretty cool, isn't it? Does
Yeah, it's
that?
like
Oh,
water.
yeah. Very cool. I didn't I didn't notice that. Um, but Judy signed a bunch of books for us as always, and if you'd like to order one, I'll put a link in the comments field and start getting your questions ready. Barbara will bring me on screen towards the end of the hour, and I'll be happy to ask any of your questions. So, Barbara, over to you.
Thank you. I unmuted myself because there's lots of puppy noise and I didn't want to subject everybody to it, but with any luck, they will shortly show up. One of them is being groomed. Anyway, Judy said that if there's enough puppy noise, she'll create puppy noise of her own and then we don't have to talk, right, Judy? We just have dogs.
Yes, we'll just let the dogs do the talking.
Wonderful idea. So here we are, 21 Joanne Brady's. Boy, do I remember when Desert Heat came out. It was such a hit. Of course, it would be here in Arizona, but because you've been writing J.P. Beaumont for a long time. And I'm trying to think, did Desert Heat come out before A Walker Family or after?
Uh, Desert Heat came out after Hour of the
Hour of
Hunt,
the Hunter.
and in the course of that year, I personally visited 1,400 bookstores. I kept count. Those were the days when I kept count. And when I told the CEO of Avon Books how many bookstores I had visited, he looked at me, he shook his head, and he said, "We should put her on benefits. This is she's visited more bookstores than our reps."
I'm sure that's true. Well, I mean, Hour with the Hunter still, in many ways, is my favorite of all of your books. It was so impactful and set here in Arizona, reflecting your time on the Tohono Reservation and your checkered career at the University of Arizona as a writer and as a wife, all of which you were able to overcome. I mean, it was a revenge book in part, but it was also really fascinating in the way you brought a more obscure Native American culture to light than, you know, Tony Hillerman had done so well with the Navajo, and Margaret Cole was writing the Wind River Reservation, and James Doss was writing the Utes, but nobody was really writing the Tohono O'odham.
Well, the I wanted those 5 years I spent on the reservation were really impactful for me, and I wanted to bring some of what I had learned on the reservation to life to the little old lady in upstate New York who would never come to Arizona, much less visit a reservation. And a few weeks ago, I heard from a man in Buffalo who said I had done just that for him, and that really made me feel good.
It's wonderful. Well, you've done a lot of things that have impacted people. I remember the teddy bears in J.P. Beaumont, the police department taking the teddy bears around to comfort people.
Actually, I was watching a true crime show this week where an officer pulled out a teddy bear and gave it to a child at a crime scene, and that that was I like to put little pieces of real stuff in the background of my books, and I love writing series. I love having the opportunity to watch my characters grow and change over the years. In Desert Heat, the first Joanna Brady book, it starts with this vivid scene that I remember almost verbatim when Joanna was in the kitchen with her mother, Eleanor, who was a piece of work, her daughter, Jenny, who was 9 at the time, and Joanna, who was in her late 20s and was working in the insurance business. They were waiting for her husband to come home so the two of them could go out and celebrate their wedding anniversary, their 10th wedding anniversary. And Eleanor was there to babysit Jenny. So Jenny, who is 9 and who has just had a smidgen of sex ed at Greenway School in Bisbee, Arizona, says to her mom, was I a preemie? Well, of course, she wasn't a preemie. She was right on time. What was late was the wedding. And that was like lobbing a hand grenade into the conversation because, of course, Joanna was pregnant with Jenny and unmarried long before Jenny came down the pike. Now, at the beginning of The Girl from Devil's Lake, not only is Jenny a college graduate, she has done a year's of worth of internship with a nationwide insurance, a nationwide law enforcement agency. And now she is graduating from the same police academy where Joanna herself graduated. And so we watched this little girl grow up. And that means a lot to me. With Beaumont, when he started out in the early 80s, he was this cool macho dude, at least as far as he was concerned, homicide cop in Seattle. He was divorced. He was estranged from his kids. He drank way too much. And now in the latest books, he's married to his third wife. He is happily married. He's been in recovery for decades, and he is reconnected to his family. And so that helps me stay fresh in each of the books because I become really attached to all those people.
Sorry,
Oh,
there we go. Still working on the dogs. You do, and I think for those who read your books, you know that the whole sweep of the lives of the characters is so important. Now, I want you to know, I have to hold it up. I put on my Bisbee turquoise just to do this event today, because Rob bought it for me when we went to Bisbee. And when I think of Joanna, I try to wear it. Right.
Bisbee blue, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous color. It's a lot different than the Navajo blue. And, and it's also, this is more delicate than Navajo jewelry, which is really made for men. I have some, and you can hardly lift your arm when you put on one of those Navajo bracelets. But the Bisbee stuff, I think, is beautiful.
And the Bisbee blue was high graded out of the mines. Do you know what high graded means?
I don't.
That means the miners carried their lunches in lunch pails into the mine, and they carried their lunch pails out of the mine with turquoise in them,
I see. Unbeknownst to their employer, I'm assuming.
unbeknownst to their employer, correct?
Got it. Okay. I remember visiting the Kimberley diamond mines in South Africa where they did, I mean, that was a sort of constant thing, like a strip search. But, you know, it's what mining would be if you were exposed to all these precious stones. Anyway, so we went from Washington, and then an hour of the Hunter, we're in Tucson in southern Arizona. Then we get desert heat, and we are in Bisbee, where Judy largely grew up. And then she started yet another Arizona series, the Allie Reynolds series, which hangs around in Sedona, occasionally wanders down to Phoenix and all. So, you've done a wonderful job mapping Arizona with your books, I think.
Well, and somebody said, well, why do you use real places? Well, I write fiction, but I'm lazy. And if you make up places, I watch a lot of true crime, and the way they trip the criminals up is they can't keep their story straight because they tell a lie to the cops on the scene and then they tell something else to the detectives, and then and pretty soon all those contradictions trip them up. it's easier to remember the truth and what's real than it is to remember a lie. So that's why I ground my stories in real places. And that way, when Joanna is driving from Bisbee to Phoenix, to Glendale, really, to the police academy, I know the landscape she's driving through. When the body of the dead child is found floating under the San Pedro Bridge in St. David, I know what that looks like. And I also know that most of the time, the San Pedro is this sandy, dry riverbed with nothing in it. But when the rains come and when there are downpours, what you get is a wall of floodwater 12 feet high. And so people reading that book may be thinking, well, it's the desert. How could there be a flood so high that it's endangering the bridge? Well, they're the same people who blithely drive through Arizona not paying attention to the road signs that say, do not enter when flooded.
Why isn't that the truth? That's very heavy over Montmorency around in eastern Arizona. But it always cracks me up because they're so close together. Rob and I were doing that, and we thought, what would you do if you were on this road and all of a sudden, in front and behind you, you're not supposed to enter either of the flood zones? I mean, how many cars could pile up on the crest of the hill while we're waiting for the floodwater to disperse?
Well, when I was living at Three Points, we were stuck on the far side of Brawley Wash for an hour and a half on more than one occasion. At one point, my first husband actually rescued a drowning Gila monster from the flood.
Well,
And
we just had a flood in Scottsdale and a woman died. And Globe over the mining community, much, near us over, had terrible flooding. So it's true that especially when the soil is not receptive to taking in water, I mean, we have caliche here, which is this heavy layer of clay. So when it does rain in any abundance, you do wind up with flooding.
it can be very dangerous. And I know that 2 years ago, Bisbee had a big fire on Main Street that had Main Street shut down for months. And I'm sure Globe is built in much the same way. My first husband used to say he could get drunk in one Arizona mining town and wake up in another and never know the difference. But I'm sure that Globe is built in that same kind of canyon situation. And when the water came down, there was no
Right.
place to go.
No, and it's so rapid too that people can't escape. But anyway, we're here to talk about. I want to say that, much of the time when you write your villains, your antagonists, because a good book needs a protagonist and an antagonist, they have some redemptive feature or there's some reason for them to be behaving like that. But you've created one in this book, although the first chapter gives you an idea. And it's set because I looked it up, the prologue in fertile Minnesota, 1956. And I understand, and the reader can
Open
understand.
People who opened to that page were probably astonished and said, wait a minute, this is Joanna. She's supposed to be in southern Arizona. What am I doing in fertile Minnesota?
Well, you make that clear. But I mean, so I'm waiting for, this incident and then to see the character development of this guy. And there actually isn't any because he's just bad. I mean, he starts out, in what could be a situation where there might be some like, redemptive value to, and then he just stays that way. And he ends up, strangely enough, in Bisbee, Arizona, in the guise of a normal person.
Living in plain sight,
Mhm.
working as a teacher during the year, and spending his summer vacations committing murders all across the country. He is irredeemable. I think one of the see, I don't know what's going to happen in a book. When I start writing it, I just sort of have to see where it goes. And one of the scenes that surprised me the most was when he actually tracked down his birth father in in prison, and the conversation between those two took a very dark turn. And I thought, boy, he really is bad.
Yeah. No, he's truly irredeemable. As I said, in the first chapter, there's some possibility that, it was just going to be that one set of circumstances that made him a killer. And I waited to see what would happen. And what happened was he's just Breaking Bad. That was it.
Well, so his story starts in 1956, and it's sort of the wallpaper in the background of the story. The real story, of course, is Joanna and her current life, what's happening in it, and how she's dealing with this little boy who has drowned in a flash flood, or has supposedly drowned in a flash flood. And so she's dealing with that set of circumstances. And in the meantime, Stephen Roper's life is going on apace. By the way, I now know that in Devil's Lake, South Dakota, there is no apostrophe. It's plural devils.
Oh, okay. Well, there you are. Punctuation trips up everybody. What can I say? So you have Joanna, who is extremely fortunate with her second husband. When we first met her, she was a widow. And her career, law enforcement, took off from that. And she's a very supportive second husband, which of course for you is writing real life since you have a very supportive second husband. So I kind of like that. But we also have this ongoing pain in the butt in Bisbee, a woman reporter. And she's been around. And so in this book, you decide to give her a bigger story than usual.
And a story that surprised me.
I
Again,
wondered if it did.
I if I were an outliner, I would never write my books because I would know what was going to happen. But in this book, I believe people will be really surprised by their reaction to Marlis Shackelford. She is, yes, she's a pain in the butt. She's been a pain in the butt to Joanna Brady from the beginning.
Yeah.
And yet, at the end of the book, someone pointed out to me a few months ago that in my books, there's always this tiny bit of reconciliation at the end. And that's what happens, surprisingly enough, between Joanna and Marlis.
I thought I mean, yes, this is where the story took you. And I wonder if you ever see where it's going and put the brakes on. Does that ever happen where you think, well, okay, we could do that, but maybe we'll not? Or do you just go with it?
I just go with it. I believe they call me a seat of the pants writer.
Right. No, I understand that, but I mean, I can see that, as momentum goes along, that you could come to a fork in the road with a character where you could decide to go that way or that way. And I don't know. Is it some? I remember Dana telling me, Dana Stabenow, years ago, she killed off a really great character in one of her books, and a lot of people have never quite forgiven her for it. But it was a last minute decision. She was writing along, and then all of a sudden, it was like, okay, Jack needs to die.
In the Allie Reynolds books, when Allie's father, who is in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's, manages to leave his memory care home and step in front of a moving vehicle. That was that was a surprise to me, and a lot of readers were really upset by that outcome. And but that was the outcome. I
Right.
I have to say something about Butch, Joanna Brady's second husband. When she met him when she went to the police academy, and he was running a restaurant. He owned a restaurant. And then in the next book, he turned up in Bisbee. And he just sort of hung around and wouldn't go away. And when I told my editor at the time that they were going to get married, she said, "Oh, don't let them get married. If they get married, it'll be boring." Well, Bill and I have been married for 40 years. Being married isn't boring. Being married is learning the art of compromise and the art of coping and the art of supporting one another. I read a book years ago by a now name brand author, and he had a situation where a family had a dog and the dog didn't have a name. And when the family left home, there was no sign that anyone took care of the dog in their absence. And then when the house burned down, the dog died. And the only reason the dog was in the book was to die in the fire. And I have taken the position that if you have kids or dogs or whatever in a book, somebody has to be there to take care of them. And Joanna was in a stressful job. She had animals, she had her daughter, and she needed someone to keep the home fires burning. And that's where Butch came in. And I have no regrets about bringing him on board.
No, I think he actually enriches the novels. And again, I remember years ago, I asked Sue Grafton what her husband Steve did, and she smiled at me and she said, "He makes my life possible," which I thought was a really wonderful answer.
That's what
Um,
that's
you
what
know,
Bill has done for me.
yeah.
Be- because I write the books, and for years he wrote all the checks. And then when he couldn't write checks anymore, and I suddenly had to write a check a couple of years ago, the first one I wrote was dated in the wrong century. So,
I hear you. No, I
so
mean, it is also a constant period of adjustment, but I do think that, you're right. A long and happy marriage, you make each other's lives possible. And, there was an article, when was it? I read newspapers accumulated while I was gone last week, so I don't remember where I read it looking through this morning. But there was a feature on couples where the woman made more money than the man. And they had several examples. And I certainly know quite a few couples where the woman makes more money than the man, or the woman maybe is on her own and, is a breadwinner. So and oftentimes then as the man makes more money and not, but anyway, as long as there's money coming from somewhere, in a healthy relationship, both parties should be able to cope with it.
it's it's a shared, it's a shared, it's like a team of horses moving forward and each pulling part of the load.
So allowing Jenny to grow up and move off into her own life and her own law enforcement, how do you see that changing Joanna's life and Butch's life, if at all?
Well, eventually I hope they'll become grandparents. Actually, I my personal belief is what my characters do in the bedroom is none of my business. So what happens to them is behind closed doors. Someone wrote to me and asked me, well, do Butch and Joanna have a completely platonic relationship? And I wrote back and I said, well, they have two kids. I don't think so.
I got it. But it's not just, children. As you point out, they're animals, because this is rural. And I mean, they have many things to look after. Plus, she's in a risky job. And I remember years ago, who was it? Catherine Hall Page, I think it was, decided to let her main character become pregnant and have a baby. And yet her main character was the one out there risking her life solving crimes. And she got a lot of flack for that, you know. And there was kind of a trope about if you were going to have women who were private eyes or in law enforcement or whatever it was that they were going to do, they really shouldn't be moms because, what would happen if something happened to them? So, which is an answer to that if Joanna's killed on the job?
Well, I've had people lied into me about that. as well. And I just say, well, c'est la vie.
Well, there was a young woman, a firefighter here, who died recently fighting a fire up north. And she was a mom. She had children, and a husband. And, I think there are lots of women in risky jobs today. And, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden we should, you know, they're going to stop having families. It's a shared risk.
It's a shared risk. I always thought the Equal Rights Amendment should read the Equal Rights and Responsibilities Amendment.
Sorry, I can't keep the dog quiet. Her brother is outside getting groomed by the drive-up groomer, and she's feeling very persecuted that she's inside at the front door and can't get out. So
Too
she's
bad.
right, she's gonna let me know it's not a good idea. And their support dad is not here at the moment. So there we go. Anyway, so Joanna Brady has been a wild success, and Desert Heat was a paperback original, as indeed your Beaumont books were. Hour of the Hunter was your first hardcover, wasn't it?
Yes, Hour of the Hunter was the first hardcover.
And so we moved, I know Tombstone Courage. I'm trying to remember how many Bradys were there before they moved into hardcover.
The second Joanna Brady was hardcover. The second Alley was hardcover.
Okay.
The 10th Beaumont was hardcover.
And today, the small paperback that so many authors that I remember certainly in the 90s and got started in the 80s maybe, it's not possible anymore because the small paperback has virtually disappeared. The Kindle is kind of its death knell, and then the way they were sold in grocery stores and drugstores and airports and all, that doesn't really happen anymore. So, but I
Books,
think it would have been hard for many of you to really get started
oh,
without that opportunity to publish that way.
I really built my audience on that original paperback
Mhm.
readership. Uh, Early on, there was a writers' conference here in Seattle, and this was before my first book came out. And the the only way I was able to go was by volunteering because I wasn't making any money. So my job was to pick a New York editor up from the airport and take her to the conference site. And so I did. Used my vehicle and my gas money to go down to the airport. I loaded her luggage in, and we drove to the conference. And she asked if I was a writer, and I said yes. And I said my first hardback and my first paperback is coming out next year. And she said, and this is a direct quote of original paperback, that's where anybody who wants to get published can get published. I took her to the conference. I don't know how the hell she got home. She may still be wandering in the woods down by Tacoma.
For you, right? Well,
The
yeah.
airport.
But yet, you know what? I mean, just thinking about this, Harlan Coben was a paperback original author. Lisa Scottolini, when she was here in July, we talked about that. Everywhere That Mary Went was a paperback original. Rick Riordan, who, has made an absolute killing writing mythology, he started out as a paperback original mystery writer. Robert Crais, The Monkey's Raincoat, a real classic, was a paperback original. So I think it was a form that allowed um, a wonderful array and digression of authors where there was a lower risk for the publisher, so they were willing to take in more writers. And the problem now with losing that as a format is that the bar to getting published at all has gone up.
That's true. And they I don't believe that self-publishing is the kind of entree into publishing that people hope it's going to be. I think it's a lot harder to move from self-publishing into standard publishing uh, than people imagine. I do have to say though, yesterday when I signed all of those books for the guy who wanted all the Beaumonts, one book was missing because they couldn't get in book number one, Until Proven Guilty, which came out in June of 1985. And so I thought, well, if that's out of print, then my goose must be cooked. So I called I emailed my editor this morning and asked me, and she said, no, it was out of stock, but they just printed 1,000 new copies of the paperback. So, so obviously the paperback market has not completely vanished. It's still out.
No, no, it hasn't completely vanished, but I notice at the bookstore we have contracted our shelving quite a lot because there are so many fewer books in that format. It used to be an entire wall, and now it's shrunk down to maybe two-thirds of a wall. Um, and the larger paperback, I think part of it, Judy, is um, readers, much of the reading public is older, and the print size is more convenient to have a larger book and larger print. Um, but it's again, I think a lot of it was just the distribution channel went away because people are not, once you got online book selling, people were not really picking up books, at the grocery store or in the drugstore or the airport where so many of those books were sold. So who knows? It's hard to keep up with publishing and trends, I try, but every day it's a new surprise. And every day they're working farther and farther ahead. Your publisher yesterday sent me their summer event request grid that I am supposed to fill out in October. And I wrote back this time and I said, I don't care. I really don't care what's happening next summer now. And, I'm not sure why they're doing that. And what happens is that the only people that you would reasonably request looking at this list would be people you already knew, because there's no chance that you have, in any way read or familiarized yourself with an author that you haven't any experience with or have never read. Um, so I think it's kind of on a self-defeating path, but I'm not running it, so there we are.
Yes. And my publicist this time booked me to do a grand opening Barnes and Noble signing in a little suburb that is an hour's drive away from my house, south. And I said, well, what about the rest? Oh, she said, we're only doing one event per city. I'm sorry, that's a stupid idea. This is my this is my base camp. So I've set up some other signings without their permission, but I'm sorry, next year I'll know that in advance and I'll start setting up my own signings in time before all of the events places are booked.
Well, part of the problem is that COVID changed with people not working anymore in the office and talking to each other and having, it has fragmented things, and people now have checklists. I once had and then I will stop complaining about this because that's not why you tuned in to watch this, but just to show you how difficult it is, I had a new publicist who set up an event, and she clearly had a checklist, and she sent me one email for every item on it, 29 emails for, all of which could have been done in like one email. And I felt in a way sort of sorry for her, in a way homicidal, because I really didn't have time to keep answering all these emails. And so, yeah, I mean, there are new strategies, new ways of getting books to readers, and some of the traditional ways I think are not working the way they used to, but that's okay. We just all have to keep up.
But we're moving, and I'm really grateful that the girl from Devil's Lake with the apostrophe is right now.
Good point. I love that with the apostrophe. And I do think, and I'm really glad you pointed it out. I didn't really notice, like as Patrick said, that there was this very subtle kind of silver. And it's an embossed title too. So when you rub your hand over it, it's a three-dimensional kind of a
You
thing.
have to hold it in a certain light to be able to see that it's embossed. Yes,
Yeah, there we go. I'm kind of flashing it. So no Allie Reynolds in the spring. What are you working on? Will there be a Joanna next year and an Allie?
I'm working on the next Beaumont book.
Ah,
But one of the things that I think is important about the girl from Devil's Lake is Stephen Roper's victims span the continent
right,
from the East Coast to the West Coast, from corner to corner. And those homicides where there is no connection between the victim and the killer are the most difficult to solve.
right.
And what I've learned on my true crime shows is that the cases that aren't solved haunt the people who investigate them, and they haunt the families of the lost loved one, loved, who lost their loved ones. And I think the girl from Devil's Lake showcases that in a way that not many books do.
Yeah, a true serial killer, in fact, survives with the no connection. There isn't any logical way to kill them. But the cruel thing, I think, for the families is they're not ever entirely sure that this person is dead. There's always that faint whisper of hope that maybe they're alive somewhere, leading some kind of a life. Um, and that's a cruel thing to keep hope alive for as long as happens. And I like the way that Joanna um, is in contact with law enforcement, spanning this reach, as much reach as she can, to try. And then you bring back a character at the very end, who we thought was lost. Yep. And
Carpenter left
he's gonna come back and try to help deal with like
some of those
the
clues.
90 the 90 some crimes that where they now know who committed them. Um, and
They
partly that
have the
that it's
blonde-
another interesting thing that you bring up and seems to be generally true, although I'm not an expert on serial killers, but there appears to be a trophy taking compulsion for these people, and your guy has kept a box full of little trophies, and that is going to be the path to identifying the victims and giving their families, some kind of resolution.
Answer is yes. He has his cigar box, and he the first item in his cigar box is the wedding band of his first victim. And the cop who was first on the scene, was accused of stealing that wedding band. And he's still pissed about it all these years later.
Who could blame him? Right. So, I mean, so your book ends, but in a way it doesn't end because out there is going to be this, constant outreach to people who lost people to your killer. So, I thought it was an interesting side of you to create this irredeemable killer because oftentimes, most often, you like humanity in people and you try to bring that out even in the bad guys.
Well, he doesn't have it.
No.
Stephen Roper is an exception to all of those rules.
Well, there you have it. It's just right. All right, Patrick, come and tell us if there's anything that people would like to ask now that we've shocked them.
Yeah, sounds like he was just a bad seed.
He really was.
Um, Actually, I have a question for you, Judy. When did you first get started with the red pen from the very beginning? Or are
Actually,
there legitimate J.A. Jance signatures that aren't red?
there are by the third book, I was smart enough to start using only one pen and only one color of ink because I would do all of those drive-by stock signings, and then someone would show up with one of those books and want to have it personalized, and I'd have to go looking for a blue ink pen or a black ink pen. And
That's
so
smart.
the third book is when I went all in on all red.
That's right. It's your signature pen for sure.
Have you changed brands over the years?
No, I have red Uniball pens.
There you go. Let's see here. Okay, someone named Eric just asked, with such a wide body of work, how do you keep your creativity fresh?
By having more than one set of characters and by letting them age. I didn't want to leave a character stranded in the 80s. The 80s weren't that good for me. So by letting them age and by seeing who they were once and who they are now, it keeps me really interested in their stories.
Oh, here, actually, I have a question as well. I'm noticing those beautiful baskets behind you with the one with the two snakes, and then the painting. I have a couple of people asking if you could talk about what's behind you there.
Well, yes, just a moment. These are Tohono O'odham baskets. The baskets are made from yucca. The core yucca has to be picked in the spring before the first rainstorm. Otherwise, it'll get black spots on it. And most of the most of the baskets, like this one, for instance, is these are made, the green is bear grass and the white is yucca. Actually, this was a gift to me last year when I did a signing at the on the reservation. And this is a basket to hold all my thoughts. But the Tohono O'odham do not use any kind of dyes. This is the man in the maze. And the, again, the light color is yucca. The red color is the root of the yucca. So in order to make one of these red baskets, the yucca actually has to die. The other thing they do is they make horsehair baskets, and that's what this one is. And I bought it unfinished so people can see the horsehair that goes into the basket. But again, this is the man in the maze. And for a number of years, I had one of these sitting on a shelf in our other house, and it had that year we did 26 auction dinners at our house. And for the first 5 or 6 photos, that basket was front and center. And then it disappeared. And somewhere along the way, someone took that basket from me. And I know enough about Tohono O'odham baskets to know they didn't have any luck with them. But I'm sitting in our dining room, and this is the living room. You can see Arizona is a big part of our decor here.
Got a
That
lot of great light in that room, it looks like.
it's I grew up in very humble circumstances. The idea that someday I'd be able to live in a home like this was just never in my wildest dreams. And yet here I am, and it's because of my readers. I did an appearance at in Nashville, at Killer Nashville this summer. And I'm 80. I'll be 81 at the end of this month. And so I sort of need somebody to wrangle me, and I need my daughter and my grandson went along to kind of drive me around and keep me from going off the rails. But when I stood up to talk, here were all of these hopeful writers, and I wanted to say, this is something you can do. This is this is you build it, you enjoy the journey while you're building it. But I finished the talk by saying, and yesterday when I flew into Nashville, I did it on a private jet. And then I walked away, and then they gave me a standing ovation.
Good for you. That's great. You worked so hard for so long. You really did. Um, Drove around, did so many events. I think your background in insurance and doing cold calls probably really helped you a lot when you were, starting out.
Well, what made it possible for me to into the insurance company, into the insurance business, was my history of selling Girl Scout cookies. After my first insurance manager hired me, I was living in a little town called PL. The manager lived in Longview, an hour or so away. But I owned policies with that company, and if you were a policyholder, they gave you a toll-free number to call the nearest office. So I called him, and you could call collect. And so I called collect and talked to Paul Huntington, and I told him I wanted a job. And years later, he said, "Well, how come you called me collect to ask for a job?" I said, "Paul, if I had had money enough for a long distance call, I wouldn't have needed this job." But I started out hawking Girl Scout cookies out of a radio flyer wagon in Bisbee, Arizona, when I was a brownie.
Wow. Okay. I was a
I can
brownie,
see
but
I
I
can
didn't
see
give
you
you that
I can see Judy selling the hell out of a Girl Scout cookie.
too.
Was it the Thin Mints back
Actually,
then?
Thin Mints are my least favorite, but they are the most popular.
Most popular. Yeah.
You
Oh,
know,
that's
that wouldn't
great.
have been easy hauling a wagon up and down Bisbee, Arizona, because I mean, it's up and downhill all the way.
Well, in Girl Scout cookie season, I used the wagon to lug Girl Scout cookies around. In the summertime, when they had the Greenway School Library open one day a week, I used it to haul loads of books back and forth from the library. So that radio flyer wagon got a lot of use.
I can certainly see it. Probably helped you develop splendid musculature too, hauling it up and down the hills of Bisbee. Right. Bisbee, it's a really fascinating town. As Judy said, an old mining town. The Copper Queen is a ancient hotel, which is still there, and you can tour the mine, which I found I've done all that. I really, it's a great piece of Arizona history.
I actually, it's, you're talking about the using the radio flyer reminded me, as of today, about 9 o'clock this morning, I've been walking since the 6th of April of 2015, and I've been counting the steps each and every day. I have a streak of 1,409 days of 10,000 steps a day. And this morning, I crossed 42,100,000 steps and 19,000 miles. I'm at 20,000 miles right now.
Wow. Well, good for you. That explains how you're so perky at your advanced age. I am a more advanced age than Judy, and I'm not quite so perky, although I just made my way around Paris and Florence and Venice, so I guess I'm doing okay. Anyway, Patrick, any more questions? I'm having a hard time sitting up. I think flying home on Air France did my back in.
Oh no. Yes, Stefania, our Italian friend, she says, is there a location that you haven't used in your books yet where you'd like to set a story? Maybe a place with particular meaning for you.
Actually, when we were in Venice on Rick Steves' tour, we had dinner one night at a little restaurant. And while we were eating dinner, a dog began to bark. And I wrote a novella about that called Signore Bianco because it was a white dog and it was absolutely incensed about this one particular passersby. And I believe that guy was a killer.
Wow.
That novella has never been published. Maybe I should publish that novella.
Yes, you certainly should. Indeed. I like it. We had dinner at a restaurant in Venice, Paul, a friend, sorry if you're listening, called Osteria di Assassini. In other words, the hostelry of the assassins. And it was absolutely fabulous. And their wine storage was like all around you. We were in kind of an alcove, and there were shelves like bookshelves going up with wine bottles everywhere and crates over here. And as we were eating, the waiters kept darting in and plucking bottles from the shelf. And I was trying to figure out, as a librarian, I was trying to figure out what cataloging system they were using for the wine. How did they know where
Somehow
it
I
was?
thought it was the Dewey Decimal System.
It's just, I mean, it was really fascinating. But yeah, I can kind of see your story rolling out from there. Anyway, Patrick, was that it? Any more?
Just a lot of really nice comments. We had a reader on YouTube who lives in Eloy, and she was
Ah,
commenting on just how much she enjoys reading about, parts of Arizona that don't get a whole lot of press.
yeah.
Uh, so that was a nice comment, but just a lot of fans with kind words to say about your books.
Well, please, all of you kind fans, thank you so much. You make my life in this wonderful home possible, and I am exceedingly grateful.
On that note, let us say we have autographed copies of The Girl from Devil's Lake, plural, um, for you. We saw quite a lot of them, but we still have some left. And maybe we will be able to get Judy to drop in when she goes to Tucson, although that's more difficult if you're flying. But anyway, we'll get her back at some point to the Poison Pens so that you can come and see her in person. So
Preferably
thank you.
without a dust storm.
Right. Well, or a flood, as we've often mentioned, but there we go. Anyway, thank you very much, Judy. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you all for joining us this evening. Enjoy the rest of your night. Bye.
Bye.